Hello, my name is Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy at Cybeats. This is episode 38 of Powerhouse Perspectives. Our guest today, Aeva Black. Good to see you, Aeva.
Good to see you, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
As we're talking about in the green room, so you're on the East Coast right now, but you're just on the West Coast. Where do you live? Where are you?
I live on the West Coast. I'm actually still at home. It's my little bit of library behind me, but I'm mentally shifting to East Coast. I fly to DC tomorrow morning.
There you go. The Beltway. Lots of fun.
Yeah.
So, as we're talking about, so in this conversation, we try to look at from each of our guests' perspective, where we've been and where we are, where we're going. And it's all supply chain security is the effort. That's how you and I met, for example. Mm-hmm. But I think it comes down to transparency and honesty and these sort of things. So we go back to Mesopotamia sometime and talk about how we've been building these structures, information structures, and what works and what doesn't. And I love your current title, right? So open source hacker in the Azure office of the CTO at Microsoft.
Yep.
So it's been a hell of a path. And as we're putting the show together, you had a hand in Neopets. And Anthony Sawyer is our producer, who's in the background listening to this. That was a big part of his childhood, my kid's childhood. And, taking all these paths, coming in as a, relatively young open source person into this family run business that has this game that has just gone completely viral on the internet, that is part of people's lives, like yep. Anthony, like my kids. And you show up with that whole thing and that attitude, then end up here.
Yeah.
So what was that like? What led from A to B to here?
So quick version of it is that was my second company after I walked out of college. First one was building a bunch of really cool early distributed networking, peer-to-peer networking kind of stuff in the late 90s. Took a break after that startup and then got back in through MySQL. So I saw MySQL as this really cool sort of pivotal emerging tech to the beginning of a really web and LAMP stack and all that. And joined Neopets. The CTO pulled me out of the regular dev pool and said, I want you to work on special projects, make our databases scale. And I'm like, cool, this is fun. I get to play with open source. And so I was one of the first people, as I understood it at the time, to scale MySQL's NDB cluster. This is their big in-memory sort of parallel scale telco style database. And on 12 1U Dell pizza boxes, I was outperforming, $1 million Oracle rack installations that they were able to migrate off of. So huge cost savings, performance increase for all the users. Basically, all of the transaction logs, anytime you did something in Neopets that changed the state of your player or your pet, all that got recorded in the player log, and that eventually moved over to the cluster that I built.
It's, in those timeframes in the 90s, one of the things that I remember was a Usenix conference where I think it was IBM was just coming out with AIX. The big blue is going open source, right? And this, an IBM guy with 88 days to go to retirement was holding court in one of the hallways with a bunch of open source, hacker folks saying that open source was great as long as you can keep it entirely proprietary at all times.
Those days of IBM.
Right? And just this knowing cynicism. It's like, you kids don't really understand how the big world works. Really it's all backroom stuff and everything else. We can pretend to be open source. But here we are.
Here we are.
Right? And here you are at
Microsoft eating the world.
Right. And a lot of it comes down to, ironically, in cybersecurity has been a great anvil for me to hammer this, philosophical test on. Comes down to honestness and openness and clarity and transparency and certainty, which are mechanical business things. And as hackers, right, you and I look at the world, it's like, okay, we're not designing from scratch. Here's the world. How does it work? What are the pieces? And we get to the spot we're at right now. Oh, did we roll the first question, Anthony? I wasn't looking at the scroll. So how do we keep the Neopets alive? That first part. And moving us into Anthony's second question was, getting us to where we are. So I'm not mistaken, Gitbomb is one of your focuses,
Yep.
Right?
It is, and we just renamed it, by the way. Surprise.
To?
Omnivore. stands for Universal Bill of Receipts.
Universal
Talking
Bill
about
of
transparency, right? The whole point of Gitbomb, now renamed Omnivore, is to provide a sort of digital chain of receipts through any software supply chain, including open source and closed source, at zero effort for the actual developers building it. That's the key, is that it shouldn't take any effort, like building a new CI system or learning a new language. You shouldn't have to do that. It should just be automatic. And at the end of whatever your build chain is, you get an RPM or a dev, you get a Docker image, whatever. You have that traceability all the way back to the input, .c files in the lower layers, or even the layers under your compiler itself.
And this is, for everybody out there paying any attention to this conversation, this is where we are in supply chain intelligence today, right? Aeva and I are involved in the very thick of this, where we're coming up with the things and, the engineering and the policies and whatnot. And you and I need to compare notes. It was last year at RSA.
At RSA, yep.
Right. And you with Omnivore, me and Mehdi with DBOM, a couple of years back, starting to look at these systems. And I'm wearing my S4 shirt that I got last year. So next month, I'm giving a talk on day in the life in the S-bomb. And just for the first time, trying to map out for everybody how it all fits together, from the open source engineer to the vendor who uses that library to the integrator that uses that product to make a solution for an asset owner who then lives in the real world and has to deal with all these things. And one of the things that I find out, through discussions like this, or just the work I do every day, is trying to help people understand where we are in time. And where we are in time right now is that Chris and Aeva still need to sit down and really compare DBOM and Omnivore.
Yeah.
It just hasn't been done yet. It just hasn't been the time yet.
Yeah.
But we can see out into the future. And I think, based on my career and based on your career, and the obvious fact that, while it was unpopular 20, 30 years ago, now this is the way business is done.
Yeah.
And folks like us are looking at it and saying, I need to be really clear. Everything you just said, it needs to not be a science project. Wherever I am. Right.
We've had a sort of inversion in the past 20 years from Linus's law that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, right? Famous sort of expiation of why open source is supposed to be better and more secure is that you have more people who can look at the code and find the bugs and fix them. That may have been true, but in these 20 years, we now have so many more people engaged in writing open source, publishing software that way. I think it's inverted, and better said now, as given enough eyeballs, all software contains bugs.
Right. And visibility and clarity, with the, as I say, we don't talk a lot, about the individual products and things going on right now. But, the one thing for me was Cybeats, this S-bomb studio thing that Dimitri and the folks made. When he first showed me the user interface, I thought File Explorer. And I was around for Windows 2.0 or whatever it was, right? And I was a Unix geek in South Carolina. And it was very easy at the time, to say, no, everybody wants the command line. But I saw this pop-up thing where you could just go click, click, click. There it is.
Yeah, and you get a tree. First time you really got a tree. Like I remember MS-DOS, I didn't have a tree command on there. Yeah, cat grep ls, dir pipe cat grep. We're sitting there hacking everything out, and the difference when it becomes a default, and not just hackers like you and I, but anybody can say, I need to see where that code came from, what's happened to it, who's touched it, where is it along the path, and everyone from the litany of folks that have been on this show, for example, right now, everybody, John Stewart at Citibank, Microsoft, right? These huge organizations are going down this path, not because of peace and love and grooviness and unicorns, because it's business. It is cheaper and faster and easier with better uptime, customer satisfaction, all those business terms. And it is at this point entering in the policy discussion, right? Europe and the US are both governments are deeply engaged in figuring out how to secure software supply chains writ large. And both of the draft policies include callouts about open source. They'll affect open source. And at least my take on this so far is neither of these drafts, CRA in Europe, SOSA in the US, neither one is appropriately is approaching open source as it's grounded in free speech, personal expression, disclaimer of liability, and the ability to write and publish code pseudonymously or anonymously are both, both of those are really key to all the development of the past 25, 30 years in open source that are different from commercial enterprise closed source products. And the potential mismatch there could be pretty damaging to all of our innovation, all of our companies that now depend so heavily on both open source we can use and our ability to collaborate together in open source communities like the ones Linux Foundation or Apache or Eclipse Foundation host. Like that common collaboration, in a sense, I'll sort of evoke my own title, the hacking of open source. It's how we're hacking productivity in creating software together faster by collaborating on the sort of foundation, the infrastructure layers. But you add regulation, if you impose liability and prevent people from expressing their ideas into the commons, you also slow that all down. So we got to get it right.
And policy hacking has become the term that I find the most interesting over the last couple of years. 1, 2, 3 years, right? And as I say, I'm on these experimental electric boats. I've been sailing up and down the Florida coast for the last year. And all the physical and cyber and electrical things are simple. It's policy hacking, and the policies are set in space over time, right? Since World War II, recreational boating exists. Before that, it didn't, and down to the size of slips, to the businesses around them, to the policies. To our point here, that have developed around those came for those reasons. And it's easy to say this is the way things have always been, but it hasn't been that way long. And the policies aren't necessarily the policies we'll have in, 20, 30, 50, 70 years out.
And our basis for open source today is really only about 24 years old. And it's not a law. It's not a Supreme Court case. It's a Ninth Circuit decision, Bernstein v. DOJ. That's it. That's the legal basis in terms of court precedent or law. Everything after that is software licenses. And the OSI approved set of licenses and the 10 criteria of the OSD is really a sort of a policy hack. How do we enable all of this collaboration through the tool of software licenses, setting aside trademark and patents as different tools of policy?
Right. And with that, Anthony, if you want to scroll the last question, because and I like hacking versus engineering, because again, with hacking, we're just dealing with the world as it is and moving it forward incrementally. Yep. And when people see policies at times, they say, well, this is the policy. And it's like, you had to understand how that policy got there. And quite often
people wrote that and people can change it.
Right. And we put it in place for a while, and we find, as we scale up, it's missing this nuance, or it was wrong in the first place, and we change it. Right. And this, I'm notoriously optimistic, and after the era that I've lived through with so many end of times, 1984, Y2K, Cold War,
right,
overpopulation, we're all going to die, right? I think we work this out, and I think at the end of the day, it's because of open source, free speech, democracy. For of all the failings of these things, it's more efficient and it's better. So, do you agree? Is this going? And we can dive right into supply chain intelligence. I think the things going on that I see down from attestation ecosystems to the policy expressed in contract language between business partners, we're driving more and more down towards clarity and honesty and transparency. I mean, you could be dishonest if you like, but you're going to be transparently dishonest, and that's going to come with its own baggage. So, or am I just Pollyanna? Is it? Do we win? How much do we win?
I think. Well, I like your optimism. I think things have been and will continue to accelerate. And we have sort of acceleration going on right now in the AI space, in auto-generated code and speech and deep fakes and all of that. We have acceleration, and I don't know where that ends. It's a little terrifying to look down that kaleidoscope of the next 5 to 15 years of technology. And I think if we're going to win, it's going to be through open technology, open standards, open hardware, because we need that transparency. We need that auditability to have trust in the tools we are using that we depend on. And yes, it's good to trust companies, but we also don't live in Many of us don't just live in one country. Our companies operate globally. Many of us travel a lot or have family in other countries, and that interplay becomes tricky again in the policy space. We think, as I'm looking at policy hacking for these open source software security laws, I don't want to see a world. I think we lose if these policies fragment our collaboration in open source.
Right, and I'm glad you put that time frame on the next, because my optimism is very specific. I think long term we win. Now that may not be my lifetime. I'm sort of interested in that, and the people I know.
Yeah.
So the next 5 or 15 years, the next 30 years.
Yeah. We have some big challenges in that time scale.
That's right.
Yeah.
So fortunately, we get to play with that. Well, I think we're about at time. But while I have you, I definitely want to put something in the calendar, and
absolutely,
I need to do that anyways.
Yep.
And
hopefully we'll cross paths in another hallway soon.
Right. You going to S4 by any chance?
Not planning on it. I'll be at SHMU, giving a talk on open source security at SHMU this week, and then I will probably be around RSA.
Okay. Well, we're going to have an SBOM get together again at RSA of some sort. So
awesome.
We'll definitely see you there.
Sounds good.
Thanks for everything you do, Aeva.
Thank you, Chris. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, folks.